At 24, Zara Williams carries the weight of $180,000 in student debt while balancing cocktail trays in an upscale Seoul hotel. She dreams of surgical scrubs and saving lives, but exhaustion from double shifts is wearing her down to nothing. Tonight, one wrong door will change everything when she stumbles into the private world of Kim Jae-sung, a Korean mafia boss who sees something in her tired eyes that he cannot ignore. The fluorescent lights in the staff corridor buzzed overhead as Zara pressed her back against the wall, clutching her medical textbooks against her chest. Her shift at the Meridian Hotel had ended 40 minutes ago, but she needed these stolen moments to review tomorrow's anatomy exam. At 24, she balanced worn serving trays with the relentless demands of her medical degree at Seoul National University. Every day was a careful calculation of hours and energy, tips and tuition payments, dreams and desperate reality. Her natural hair was pulled back into a professional low bun, though a few rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face. Even in the harsh lighting, her skin held a warm brown glow that spoke of strength and resilience. She was tall and graceful, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to carry multiple plates without thinking. But tonight, exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. The debt papers in her textbook showed the brutal mathematics of her situation. $180,000 in loans, interest compounding monthly, minimum payments that barely touched the principal. She worked every available shift at the hotel, earned decent tips from wealthy international guests, but the numbers never seemed to shrink. Medical school was her dream, her calling, her future, but the cost was slowly crushing her spirit. She checked her phone. 3:30 in the morning. She needed to be back for the breakfast shift in 5 hours, then straight to afternoon lectures. Sleep was becoming a luxury she could rarely afford. Her roommate had moved out last month, unable to tolerate Zara's constant studying and irregular schedule, leaving her with full rent on their tiny apartment near the university. The keycard in her hand was supposed to open the staff break room, where she could grab a quick coffee and review her notes in peace. But when she pushed open the door marked with the identical hotel logo, she found herself in entirely the wrong place. The room was nothing like the cramped employee area she expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering Seoul skyline. Rich leather furniture arranged around a massive conference table. The lighting was soft and expensive, casting everything in warm golden tones. The air smelled of cedar and something else, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. 3 men in perfectly tailored suits sat around the table, documents spread before them, speaking in rapid Korean. They looked up as she entered, conversation stopping mid-sentence. But it was the man at the head of the table who captured her complete attention. Kim Jae-sung was 35 years old, though his controlled intensity made him seem both older and younger simultaneously. He was Korean, with sharp, aristocratic features that could have been carved from stone. His dark hair was styled back perfectly, not a strand out of place despite the late hour. His eyes were the color of black coffee, intelligent and calculating, missing absolutely nothing. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Zara made in 6 months, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light. But it was his presence that filled the room like a physical weight. Power radiated from him in waves, the kind of authority that came not from a job title, but from something deeper and infinitely more dangerous. When his gaze fixed on her, Zara felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, every detail of her appearance catalogued and assessed. The other men reached for something inside their jackets, but Jae-sung raised one hand in a subtle gesture that froze them completely. His attention never left Zara's face. "Can I help you?" he said in perfect English, his voice low and melodic with just a trace of accent. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was in the wrong place, absolutely the wrong place, but her customer service training kicked in automatically. "I am so sorry to disturb you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought this was the staff break room. Let me get out of your way." But instead of leaving, something compelled her to stay professional. She noticed empty glasses on the table, the subtle signs that these men had been working for hours. "You look like you could use fresh drinks," she offered, moving toward the small bar in the corner. "What can I get for you, gentlemen?" The other men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. But Jae-sung leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating dark eyes. His gaze took in her hotel uniform, slightly wrinkled from her long shift. Her medical textbooks clutched against her chest. The careful way she moved despite her obvious exhaustion. "Whiskey," he said simply. "Neat." She moved to the bar with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The bottles were premium labels, brands that cost more than her monthly rent. She poured 4 glasses of amber liquid, added ice to 3 of them, kept one neat as requested. When she turned back to the table, the other men had gathered their papers and were preparing to leave. Jae-sung spoke to them in rapid Korean, his tone suggesting dismissal rather than discussion. They bowed slightly and filed out, leaving Zara alone with the most dangerous-looking man she had ever encountered. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I should really get back to work," Zara replied, though her shift had ended hours ago. "Sit," he repeated, and this time it was not a request. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Zara perched on the edge of the leather chair. The material was softer than anything she had ever touched, probably worth more than her entire wardrobe. Jae-sung sipped his whiskey, never taking his eyes off her face. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zara Williams," she answered honestly, though she immediately wondered if she should have lied. "You are American," he observed. "Yes, sir. I am studying medicine at Seoul National University and working here to pay for school." "Medicine," he repeated, glancing at the textbooks she still held. "What kind of medicine?" "I want to be a surgeon," she said, and for the first time that night, her voice held genuine warmth. "I want to save lives." Something shifted in his expression, so subtle she almost missed it. A softening around the eyes, a barely perceptible relaxation of his shoulders. "How much debt?" he asked quietly. The question was so direct, so unexpected, that she answered before thinking. $180,000. Plus interest. He nodded as if this confirmed something he already suspected. "You work double shifts, study between customers, sleep maybe 4 hours a night. You have not been home to America in over 2 years because you cannot afford the flight." Zara stared at him, chilled by the accuracy of his assessment. "How do you know that?" "I notice things," he said simply. "Your uniform is perfectly clean but shows wear from excessive washing. Your textbooks are used, probably bought secondhand. Your shoes are expensive but old, purchased when you still had hope that one pair would last years. You move like someone running on adrenaline and caffeine instead of rest." She wanted to deny it, but every word was true. The careful way she budgeted, reusing tea bags and buying day-old bread. The constant fatigue that had become her normal state. The growing fear that even with her degree, she might never escape the crushing weight of her debt. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I see potential in you," Jae-sung replied, reaching into his jacket. He withdrew a business card, thick and expensive, with only a name and phone number embossed in gold. "When you realize that hard work and good intentions are not enough, call me." Zara took the card with trembling fingers. The paper felt substantial, real, like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "What do you do, Mr. Kim?" "I solve problems," he said, standing in one fluid motion. "Specifically, I solve problems for people who deserve better than their current circumstances." He moved around the table, stopping close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody and sophisticated that probably cost more than her monthly food budget. His proximity should have been intimidating, but instead she felt oddly safe, as if his presence created a bubble of protection around her. "You came here by accident tonight, Zara Williams," he said softly, looking down at her with those intense dark eyes. "But I do not believe in accidents. I believe in opportunity." Before she could respond, he was moving toward the door. "The suite has a private exit," he said without turning around. "Take the elevator down to the parking garage. No one will see you leave." And then he was gone, leaving Zara alone in the luxurious room with his whiskey glass still warm on the table and his business card burning like a brand in her palm. She sat in the silence for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. A stranger had read her life like an open book, offered her something unnamed but significant, and disappeared like smoke. She looked at the card again. Kim Jae-sung. No title, no company name, just a phone number that felt like a doorway to another world entirely. Finally, she gathered her textbooks and made her way to the private elevator he had mentioned. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the polished metal. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in months, she felt like someone had really seen her. Not just the struggling student or the tired waitress, but her potential, her worth, her desperate need for a different kind of future. The parking garage was empty except for a few expensive cars that gleamed under the security lights. She walked quickly to the exit, still clutching his card like a talisman. Tomorrow she would return to her regular life, serving breakfast to wealthy guests and rushing to anatomy lectures. But tonight, Kim Jae-sung had planted a seed of possibility that she knew would grow in the dark soil of her exhaustion until she could no longer ignore it. 3 blocks from the hotel, she finally allowed herself to stop walking and really examine the business card. The gold lettering caught the streetlight, elegant and understated. She traced the numbers with her fingertip, wondering what would happen if she actually called. What kind of problems did a man like that solve? And what would he expect in return? As she climbed the 3 flights to her small apartment, Zara Williams had no way of knowing that her life had just taken a turn towards something infinitely more dangerous and unexpectedly more protective than anything she had ever imagined. All she knew was that for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen not just her struggles, but her worth. And that recognition felt like the most precious gift she had ever received. 3 days had passed since Zara Williams walked through the wrong door and into Kim Jae-sung's world. She carried his business card in her wallet, checking it obsessively between classes and shifts like a secret talisman. The thick paper and embossed gold lettering felt substantial between her fingers, proof that the encounter had actually happened and was not some exhaustion-induced hallucination. Back in her regular routine at the Meridian Hotel, everything felt different now. The same wealthy guests, the same polite service, the same careful balance of school and work. But underneath it all, his words echoed in her mind. I solve problems for people who deserve better than their current circumstances. She found herself wondering what that meant. What kind of problems a man like Kim Jae-sung actually solved. Her anatomy professor had returned their midterm exams that morning. 96%, the highest grade in the class. She should have felt proud, but instead she felt the familiar weight of futility. Excellent grades would not eliminate her debt any faster. Perfect attendance would not make the interest payments smaller. All her hard work and dedication seemed like drops in an ocean of financial impossibility. During her lunch break, she sat in the hotel staff cafeteria picking at a discounted sandwich while reviewing surgical procedure notes. The other servers chatted around her, but she kept to herself as always. Friendships were a luxury she could not afford when every free moment needed to be spent studying or working. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, her on and off boyfriend of 8 months. Missing you, baby. Come over tonight. She deleted it without responding. Marcus was charming and handsome, but he had no direction, no ambition, and lately he had been asking to borrow money with increasing frequency. She had started avoiding his calls. The afternoon shift passed in its usual blur of coffee orders and polite smiles. Wealthy international business travelers, government officials, celebrities who demanded perfect service and absolute discretion. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her mind half focused on tomorrow's cardiovascular physiology lecture. It was just after 7 when she noticed the 3 men standing near the hotel entrance. They were not guests. Their clothes were expensive but flashy, gold chains visible beneath open shirt collars, designer watches that caught the light aggressively. They had been watching her for the past 20 minutes, and when she tried to ignore them, they moved closer to the restaurant entrance. During a brief lull between orders, one of them approached her station. He was Korean, probably late 30s, with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. Zara Williams, he said in accented English. We need to talk. I am working, she replied politely, trying to move past him toward another table. He stepped sideways, blocking her path. This is about your boyfriend Marcus Chin. You know Marcus, right? Her blood turned cold. Marcus had never mentioned knowing anyone like these men. What about him? She asked carefully. He owes money, the man continued, his false smile widening. A lot of money. $50,000 to be exact. Plus interest that keeps growing every day he does not pay. I do not know anything about Marcus borrowing money, Zara said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. If he owes you something, you need to talk to him directly. The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, we would love to talk to Marcus. Problem is, your boyfriend disappeared 2 weeks ago. Left Seoul without telling anyone where he was going. But he was smart enough to leave us something valuable as collateral." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, smoothing it open on the nearest table. It was a loan agreement written in Korean with English translation attached. At the bottom, in Marcus's familiar handwriting, was a signature, and beneath it, another name that made Zara's knees go weak. Zara Williams, collateral guarantor. "I never signed this," she whispered, staring at her forged signature. "Does not matter what you signed," the man replied pleasantly. "Matters what your boyfriend promised. He said you were good for the money. Medical student, rich American family, plenty of resources. Said you would take care of his debt if anything happened to him." "This is not legal," Zara said, her mind racing. "You cannot hold me responsible for someone else's gambling debts." The second man moved closer, flanking her other side. "We are not lawyers, sweetheart. We are businessmen. And our business model is very simple. Debt gets paid one way or another." The third man, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. He was larger than the others, with scars across his knuckles and eyes like a dead fish. "You have 48 hours, he said in heavily accented English. 50,000 plus 2 weeks interest. 60,000 total." "I am a student," Zara protested. "I do not have that kind of money. I barely have enough for rent and food." "Then you better figure something out fast," the first man said, his smile disappearing completely. "Because if you cannot pay, we have other ways to recover our investment. Pretty girl like you. We know people who would pay good money for exclusive access. Long-term contracts, very lucrative for us." The threat hit her like a physical blow. They were talking about trafficking, about selling her to pay Marcus's debt. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. 48 hours, the scarred man repeated. "We will be in touch." They walked away as casually as they had arrived, leaving Zara standing frozen in the middle of the restaurant. Around her, wealthy guests continued their meals, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just collapsed. The loan document lay on the table like a death sentence, Marcus's betrayal written in black ink and her forged signature. She grabbed the paper and stumbled toward the staff bathroom, locking herself in a stall as panic overwhelmed her. $60,000. She had maybe $3,000 in her bank account. No family to borrow from, no friends with that kind of money. Her student loans were already maxed out, and she had no collateral for additional borrowing. Marcus had signed her name without permission, used her as a guarantee for his gambling addiction, then disappeared when the debt came due. The men who approached her were not bank representatives or legal collectors. They were criminals, dangerous criminals who viewed human trafficking as a viable business model. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, then immediately checked the message. A voice in Korean, then broken English. 47 hours, 59 minutes. "Do not make us come looking for you." Terror crashed over her in waves. These men knew where she worked, where she lived, probably everything about her daily routine. Running would be pointless. Even if she could disappear, they would eventually find her, and the consequences would be worse for having tried to escape. She pulled Kim Jae-sung's business card from her wallet with shaking hands. The gold lettering blurred through her tears. "I solve problems for people who deserve better than their current circumstances." At the time, she had wondered what kind of problems he meant. Now she understood with perfect clarity. Her finger hovered over her phone's keypad. Calling him would mean entering a world she did not understand, accepting help from a man who radiated danger like heat from a furnace. But the alternative was being sold to pay for Marcus's cowardice, becoming property instead of a person. She dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. "Zara Williams," he said, as if he had been expecting her call. "Mr. Kim," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need help." "Where are you?" he asked immediately. "Hotel bathroom. They came here. They said Marcus owes money and used my name as collateral. They want $60,000 and I have 48 hours or they will." She could not say the words. "Stay exactly where you are," Jae-sung commanded. "Do not leave that bathroom. Do not talk to anyone. I will handle this." "How did you know it was me calling?" she asked. "Because I have been waiting for you to realize that some problems require a different kind of solution," he replied. "And because men like the ones who threaten you always make the same mistake. They assume a woman alone is helpless. The line went dead. Zara sat on the closed toilet seat, clutching her phone and trying to breathe normally. 20 minutes passed. 30. She started to wonder if she had imagined the entire conversation, if desperation had made her hallucinate rescue. Then her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Problem solved. They will not bother you again. Car waiting in employee parking area, black sedan license 3847. Driver will bring you somewhere safe. She read the message 3 times before the words sank in. Problem solved. In 30 minutes, Kim Jae-sung had somehow eliminated a threat that had seemed impossible to handle. She did not know how, and part of her was terrified to find out. But when she finally gathered courage to leave the bathroom, the hotel lobby was peaceful. No threatening men lingered by the entrance. The restaurant continued its elegant dinner service without interruption. Whatever had happened, it had been handled with surgical precision and absolute discretion. Outside in the employee parking area, a black sedan with license plate 3847 waited exactly where the text had promised. The driver, a middle-aged Korean man in a perfectly pressed suit, opened the rear door as she approached. "Miss Williams," he said politely. "Mr. Kim is waiting." As the car pulled away from the hotel, Zara watched her ordinary life disappear through the rear window. She had no idea where they were taking her or what would be required in exchange for Kim Jae-sung's protection. All she knew was that for the second time in 3 days, he had seen her need and responded with swift, decisive action. The debt that had seemed impossible to escape was gone. The men who had threatened to destroy her had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. But as Seoul's glittering skyline flowed past the car windows, Zara Williams understood that her real education was just beginning, and her teacher would be the most dangerous man she had ever met. The black sedan wound through Seoul's upscale Gangnam district, past gleaming office towers and exclusive shopping centers that Zara had only glimpsed from bus windows during her hurried commutes between work and school. The driver navigated with practiced ease through streets she did not recognize, taking turns that seemed to lead deeper into a world of wealth and power that existed parallel to her own struggling reality. 20 minutes after leaving the hotel, they pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that scraped the sky. The structure was all glass and steel, modern architecture that spoke of serious money and absolute security. Cameras tracked their movement from every angle, and men in expensive suits stood at strategic positions throughout the parking area. This was not simply a residence. It was a fortress disguised as luxury real estate. The driver escorted her to a private elevator that required a keycard to operate. As they rose smoothly through floor after floor, Zara caught glimpses of the city spreading below through floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul's lights twinkled like scattered diamonds, beautiful and distant from this rarefied height. The elevator opened directly into Kim Jae-sung's penthouse office, and Zara stepped into a space that redefined her understanding of luxury. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls offering panoramic views of the city. Rich leather furniture was arranged around a massive mahogany conference table that could easily seat 20 people. Original artwork hung on the walls, pieces she recognized from her art history classes as worth more than most people's houses. But it was the attention to detail that truly impressed her. Fresh orchids in crystal vases, books in Korean, English, and Japanese lined built-in shelves. A small bar area stocked with bottles that probably cost more than her semester tuition. The lighting was warm and sophisticated, creating an atmosphere of power tempered with refinement. Kim Jae-sung stood with his back to the elevator, silhouetted against the city lights. He had changed from his earlier suit into charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. Even in this relaxed attire, he radiated the same controlled intensity that had captured her attention 3 nights ago. "Sit," he said without turning around, gesturing toward a leather chair positioned across from his desk. Zara moved carefully across the polished marble floor, hyper-aware of every sound her shoes made in the hushed space. The chair was butter-soft leather, probably worth more than everything she owned combined. From this position, she had a clear view of both Jae-sung and the spectacular cityscape beyond the windows. He turned finally, his dark eyes finding hers immediately. In the warm lighting, his sharp features seemed less intimidating and more aristocratic. There was something almost artistic about his face, as if a sculptor had carefully carved each angle to create an impression of strength and intelligence. "How do you feel?" he asked, moving around the desk to pour 2 glasses of what looked like expensive whiskey. Confused, Zara admitted honestly. "Grateful. Terrified. I do not understand what just happened or how you made those men disappear so quickly." "Understanding will come with time," Jae-sung replied, offering her one of the glasses. "What matters now is that you recognize the reality of your situation. The men who threatened you tonight were not isolated criminals. They represent a network of loan sharks and traffickers who view young women as commodities. Your boyfriend's debt was simply their excuse to claim ownership of you." She accepted the whiskey with trembling hands, inhaling the rich, smoky aroma. This was probably 50-year-old Scotch, the kind of luxury she had only read about in magazines. But even its warmth could not chase away the chill of his words. "Marcus used my name without permission," she said quietly. "I never agreed to guarantee his debts." "Legal technicalities are irrelevant when dealing with criminals," Jae-sung replied, settling into the chair across from her. "They operate by their own rules, enforce their own justice. Once they decided you were valuable, your consent became meaningless." He leaned back, studying her with those penetrating dark eyes. "But that threat has been permanently eliminated. The loan agreement has been destroyed. The men who approached you will not bother you again, or anyone else for that matter." The implication in his words made her stomach clench, but she found herself oddly grateful rather than horrified. Those men had been prepared to sell her into sexual slavery to recover their money. Whatever Jae-sung had done to stop them, it had saved her from a fate worse than death. "What do you want from me in return?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. His lips curved in what might have been approval. "Direct questions. I appreciate that quality. What I want is simple. I want you to work for me." "Doing what exactly?" Zara pressed. Jae-sung stood and moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. "I run several businesses that require absolute discretion and complete loyalty from my employees. Occasionally, members of my organization require medical attention that cannot be obtained through conventional channels. Gunshot wounds, knife injuries, other trauma that would raise questions in hospital emergency rooms." "You want me to be your personal doctor," she said slowly. "I want you to be my private medical consultant," he corrected. "You would provide care for my associates when needed, maintain absolute silence about anything you see or treat, and live under my protection while continuing your medical education." He returned to his desk and withdrew a folder thick with documents. "These are the terms of employment I am offering you," he said, placing the folder before her. $200,000 annually, paid monthly. Full tuition for your remaining medical school years. A secured apartment in this building, furnished and maintained at my expense. Complete elimination of your current student debt. Personal security around the clock. Zara stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. $200,000. More money than she had ever imagined earning. Enough to transform her entire existence from desperate struggle to comfortable security. But nothing came free, especially not from a man like Kim Jae-sung. "What are the expectations?" she asked carefully. 24-hour availability when medical services are required. Absolute loyalty to my organization and its members. Complete silence about anything you witness or learn while in my employ. You would live in my building, under my protection, for the duration of your contract. And if I refuse to treat someone," she said, "if I believe the injury was caused by illegal activity that I cannot ethically support." His dark eyes hardened slightly. "You would treat whoever I tell you to treat, using whatever methods are necessary to preserve their health and anonymity. Ethical concerns about the source of injuries are a luxury you cannot afford." The bluntness of his words hit her like cold water. He was not asking her to bend her medical ethics. He was demanding she abandon them entirely in service to his criminal organization. The money was extraordinary, life-changing, but accepting it would make her complicit in activities that violated everything she had been taught about the sanctity of human life and medical neutrality. "I became a doctor to save lives," she said quietly. "To help people, not to enable violence." Jae-sung leaned forward, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "You became a doctor because you have natural compassion and intelligence. But compassion without power is meaningless. Intelligence without resources is wasted. I am offering you both power and resources, in exchange for services that will still save lives. The only difference is whose lives you will be saving. But if I help criminals escape consequences for their actions, more people could be hurt, she protested. More people will definitely be hurt if you refuse, he countered. The men you treat for me are my employees, my responsibility. If they die because medical care was unavailable, their families suffer. Their children go hungry. Their parents lose financial support. Your ethical purity would come at the cost of innocent people who depend on these men for survival. The logic was twisted but undeniable. She had been thinking in terms of abstract principles, but he was describing concrete human consequences. The families of criminal organization members were still families. Children were still children, regardless of how their fathers earned money. What about the consequences of betrayal? She asked. His expression grew cold as winter stone. If you accept this position and later choose to betray my trust, if you speak to law enforcement or reveal information about my organization, the protection I provide will be withdrawn immediately. You would be expelled from my building, your salary terminated, your security eliminated. And anyone you spoke to about my business would also face consequences. The threat was delivered quietly, almost conversationally, but its implications were crystal clear. Betrayal would not simply end her employment. It would endanger anyone she tried to involve, making her personally responsible for their safety. It was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely terrifying in its scope. Zara stared down at the contract folder, her mind spinning through the impossible mathematics of her situation. Without this offer, she would spend the next decade crushed under student debt, working multiple jobs just to make minimum payments while her dreams of surgical practice remained forever out of reach. With it, she could complete medical school debt-free, live in luxury and safety, and practice medicine at the highest levels of skill and discretion. But accepting meant abandoning the moral certainty that had guided her entire life. It meant treating gunshot wounds without asking who pulled the trigger. It meant saving the lives of people who might use that second chance to harm others. It meant becoming part of Kim Jae-sung's world, with all its violence and moral ambiguity. She thought about the men who had threatened her earlier that evening. Cold eyes and casual cruelty, viewing her as merchandise to be sold when their debts went unpaid. They operated in the same criminal world as Jae-sung, but there was a fundamental difference in how they exercised power. He had eliminated her problem without demanding anything in return, offering protection first and negotiating terms second. The folder felt heavy in her hands as she opened it, revealing page after page of legal documents written in both Korean and English. The salary figures were even more generous than he had stated. Housing allowance, food stipend, medical insurance, educational support. Everything calculated to remove every financial obstacle between her and her medical degree. At the bottom of the contract, 2 signature lines waited. His name was already inscribed in strong, confident handwriting. Kim Jae-sung, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Holdings International. Below it, a space for her own signature, with her name typed neatly underneath. Zara Williams, Private Medical Consultant. How long do I have to decide? She asked. You have as much time as you need, he replied. But understand that this offer will not be extended again. If you leave tonight without signing, we will not speak again unless you find yourself in mortal danger. She looked up from the contract to find him watching her with those penetrating dark eyes. There was no pressure in his expression, no manipulation or coercion. He had presented his terms clearly and completely, and now he was waiting for her decision with the patience of someone who controlled time itself. The pen felt impossibly heavy as she picked it up, but her hand remained steady as she signed her name in careful script. Zara Williams. The letters seemed to glow on the page, transforming her from struggling student to protected employee of the most dangerous man in Seoul. Jae-sung smiled, the expression transforming his severe features into something almost warm. Welcome to Meridian Holdings, Miss Williams. I believe this arrangement will prove beneficial for both of us. As he countersigned the contract and locked it away in his desk, Zara realized she had just traded her old life for something unimaginably different. She was no longer a waitress fighting to survive medical school. She was now a private medical consultant to the Korean Mafia, under the protection and control of Kim Jae-sung. The city lights sparkled beyond the windows like promises of a future she could not yet imagine. But for the first time in years, that future felt possible rather than impossible. And despite everything she had just committed to, that possibility felt like the greatest gift she had ever received. 2 months after signing her contract with Kim Jae-sung, Zara Williams had settled into a routine that would have been unimaginable during her days of desperate struggle. Her apartment on the 32nd floor of the Meridian building was larger than any place she had ever lived, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's skyline and furnishings that belonged in architectural magazines. The closet held designer clothes in her exact size, selected by someone with impeccable taste and unlimited resources. Her student debt had vanished overnight, deleted from her financial records as completely as if it had never existed. The work itself had proven more challenging than she expected, but not in ways she had anticipated. Jae-sung's associates were careful, professional, and respectful in their interactions with her. The injuries she treated were rarely life-threatening, mostly knife wounds from territorial disputes and occasional gunshot trauma that required discretion rather than emergency intervention. Her medical skills were sharp and constantly improving under pressure, and she found unexpected satisfaction in providing excellent care under difficult circumstances. Her apartment had been converted into a sophisticated medical suite, with equipment that rivaled most hospital emergency rooms. Surgical lights, monitoring devices, pharmaceutical supplies that arrived weekly without explanation. She had everything needed to provide trauma care except the moral certainty she had once considered essential to her identity as a healer. But that certainty had begun to feel like luxury she could no longer afford. The men she treated were not monsters. They were employees in a complex organization, many with families who depended on their income. They thanked her politely, followed her medical instructions carefully, and paid respectfully for services that literally saved their lives. Whatever violence occurred in Jae-sung's world, it remained invisible to her daily experience. Her medical school performance had improved dramatically since financial pressure disappeared from her life. With 8 hours of sleep and 3 proper meals daily, her mind felt sharp and focused in ways it had never been during her years of constant exhaustion. Her professors noticed the change, commenting on her increased confidence and deeper analytical thinking. Several had mentioned research opportunities and prestigious internship possibilities that would have been impossible when she was working double shifts at the hotel. Jae-sung himself remained somewhat distant despite their professional proximity. He visited her apartment weekly to review any medical incidents and ensure she had everything needed for optimal performance. Their conversations were cordial but formal, focused on logistics rather than personal connection. She found herself studying him during these meetings, noting the way his expensive suits never seemed to wrinkle, how his dark eyes missed absolutely nothing, the controlled economy of movement that suggested coiled strength beneath his civilized exterior. He was unfailingly polite, ensuring her comfort and safety while maintaining clear professional boundaries. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret, something that seemed almost protective mixed with careful assessment. As if he was constantly evaluating her adaptation to his world, while simultaneously ensuring nothing threatened her security within it. The evening that changed everything began like any other. Zara was reviewing cardiovascular surgery techniques when her apartment door opened without warning, which meant only one person could be entering. Jae-sung had the only other keycard, and he never used it without prior arrangement. She looked up from her medical textbook to find him standing in her doorway, but everything about his usual controlled demeanor had altered dramatically. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled and stained with what looked like blood. Most startling of all, he carried a small child in his arms, a boy who could not have been more than 8 years old. "I need your help," Jae-sung said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Car accident. He has been unconscious for 10 minutes. Pulse is steady, but he will not wake up." Zara was already moving toward the medical area, switching on surgical lights and pulling on sterile gloves with practiced efficiency. "Bring him to the examination table," she instructed, her training taking precedence over curiosity about who this child was or why Jae-sung had brought him here instead of to a hospital. The boy was small for his age, with delicate Korean features and thick black hair that fell across his forehead. His clothes were expensive but torn from the accident, and she could see developing bruises along his left side. More concerning was his lack of response to external stimuli, suggesting possible concussion or more serious brain trauma. "What is his name?" she asked, beginning her examination with gentle competence. "Minjun," Jae-sung replied, hovering close enough to touch, but staying out of her way as she worked. "He is my sister's son. My nephew." The admission surprised her. In all their professional interactions, he had never mentioned family, never revealed anything personal about his life beyond the criminal organization he controlled. But the naked worry in his voice as he spoke the child's name told her more about Kim Jae-sung than months of formal meetings had revealed. "Minjun," she said softly, running her hands carefully along the boy's skull to check for fractures. "Can you hear me, sweetheart? You are safe now. I am going to take very good care of you." At the sound of her voice, the child's eyelids fluttered. He made a small sound, not quite a word, but definitely a response to external stimulation. Zara smiled with relief, continuing her gentle examination while maintaining steady verbal contact. "His pupils are reactive and equal," she reported to Jae-sung. "Reflexes are normal. I think this is concussion rather than serious brain trauma, but I want to monitor him for the next few hours to be certain." As she continued checking his vital signs, Minjun's eyes opened fully for the first time. But instead of relief at regaining consciousness, his face immediately contorted with terror. He tried to sit up, crying out in Korean as he spotted the medical equipment surrounding him. "No doctor," he sobbed in accented English. "Please, no doctor. Do not make me go to hospital." Jae-sung moved toward the table, but his presence seemed to increase the child's panic rather than comfort him. Minjun pressed himself against the far edge of the examination surface, trembling with fear that seemed disproportionate to his current situation. Zara realized immediately that this was not simple post-accident disorientation. This child had developed a phobia of medical settings, probably related to whatever trauma had left him in Jae-sung's care rather than with his parents. She moved slowly, keeping her voice calm and reassuring as she approached. "I am not going to hurt you, Minjun," she said gently, holding her hands where he could see them. "I know you are scared, but you are safe now. Your uncle is here, and I am just going to make sure you feel better." The boy looked between her and Jae-sung, confusion replacing some of his terror. "Uncle," he whispered. Jae-sung stepped closer, his usual commanding presence softened into something almost vulnerable. "Yes, Minjun. I am here. This is Zara. She is going to help you feel better, just like she helped Uncle when he was hurt." Zara glanced at Jae-sung with surprise. She had never treated him for any injuries, but his fabrication seemed designed to establish trust rather than deceive the child. Minjun studied her face with the serious consideration of someone much older than his apparent age. "You helped Uncle?" he asked in careful English. "I help people when they are hurt," Zara confirmed, sitting down so she would be at his eye level rather than looming over him. "That is my job, to make hurt go away and help people feel strong again." Something in her tone seemed to reach him. His trembling decreased slightly, though he remained pressed against the far side of the table. "You are not going to take me away?" he asked. "I am not going anywhere," she promised. "And neither are you. We are just going to sit here together until you feel completely better." What followed was the most delicate medical treatment Zara had ever provided. Every procedure had to be explained in advance, demonstrated on herself first, and performed only with Minjun's explicit permission. Taking his temperature became a negotiation. Checking his reflexes required 15 minutes of gentle coaxing. But gradually, as her patience and kindness proved consistent, his fear began to transform into cautious trust. Jae-sung watched the entire process in fascination, as if he was seeing both Zara and his nephew for the first time. When Minjun finally allowed her to listen to his heart with a stethoscope, actually giggling at the cold metal against his chest, something shifted in Jae-sung's expression that made Zara's own heart skip several beats. The examination confirmed her initial diagnosis: mild concussion, some bruising, but no serious injuries that would require hospital intervention. With proper rest and monitoring, Minjun would recover completely within a few days. But more importantly, he had begun to trust her, even asking if she would stay with him while he slept. As they settled the boy on her couch with soft pillows and warm blankets, Zara found herself studying Jae-sung's face. The harsh edges of his usual expression had softened into something almost tender as he tucked the blankets around his nephew's small form. When Minjun asked for water, Jae-sung moved with careful quiet to avoid disturbing him. When the child requested a specific stuffed animal that was apparently back at their apartment, Jae-sung immediately sent someone to retrieve it without question. This was not the cold criminal mastermind she had been working for. This was a man who loved his nephew with fierce protectiveness, who prioritized a child's comfort over his own convenience, who trusted her enough to bring his most precious person into her care. After Minjun fell asleep, they moved to Zara's kitchen area to give him quiet space for recovery. She made coffee while Jae-sung sat at her small dining table, running his hands through his disheveled hair in a gesture of exhaustion she had never seen from him before. "He will be fine," she assured him softly. Children are remarkably resilient, especially with people who love them providing support. Jae-sung looked up at her with eyes that held more emotion than she had thought possible from someone so controlled. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping him, for understanding that he needed gentleness rather than efficiency." "What happened to his parents?" Zara asked carefully, not wanting to pry, but sensing that he needed to talk about whatever burden he was carrying. "His mother was my younger sister," Jae-sung replied, accepting the coffee mug she offered. "She died in a car accident 18 months ago. Minjun was in the car with her, spent weeks in the hospital, developed terror of medical environments from all the procedures he endured." "And his father?" she prompted gently. "Never in the picture," Jae-sung said with bitter edge to his voice. "Disappeared when my sister became pregnant. She raised Minjun alone until the accident." "So now he is your responsibility," Zara observed. "Now he is my family," Jae-sung corrected. "The only family I have left. Everything I have built, every decision I make, it all comes down to ensuring his safety and future." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep in her chest. She had seen him as a powerful criminal, a dangerous man who controlled illegal enterprises through force and intimidation. But sitting in her kitchen at 3 in the morning, worried about his nephew's recovery, he looked human and vulnerable and unexpectedly heartbreaking. "You are a good uncle," she said quietly. "He clearly adores you." "I am trying to be what he needs," Jae-sung replied. "But I am not sure a man like me can raise a child properly. My world is not safe for someone innocent." "Maybe the question is not whether your world is safe for him," Zora suggested. "Maybe the question is whether you can create safety within your world, which seems like exactly what you are doing." He looked at her with surprise, as if the possibility had never occurred to him. "You think it is possible," he asked, "to protect innocence while living in darkness?" "I think people are more complex than we give them credit for," she replied. "I think you can be dangerous to your enemies and gentle with your nephew. I think you can run criminal enterprises and still love someone purely. The heart does not operate by the same rules as business." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, drinking coffee and listening to Minjun's peaceful breathing from the next room. When Jae-sung finally spoke again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "My sister used to say that love was the only thing that made power worthwhile," he said. "I thought she was naive, too idealistic for the real world. But watching you with Minjun tonight, seeing how your gentleness reached him when nothing else could, I think maybe she was right." Zara felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. For the first time since signing her contract, she was seeing Kim Jae-sung not as her employer or protector, but as a man who carried heavy responsibilities, who loved deeply despite his dangerous circumstances, who trusted her with the most precious thing in his world. When dawn light began filtering through her windows, Minjun woke naturally and without fear, immediately asking if Zara would make him breakfast. As she prepared eggs and toast while Jae-sung helped his nephew wash up, the apartment felt less like a medical facility and more like a home. The domestic intimacy of caring for a child together created a bond between them that purely professional interactions had never achieved. Over the following weeks, as Minjun recovered fully and began spending more time in the building, Zara found her relationship with Jae-sung shifting in subtle but significant ways. He asked about her medical school progress, not just for professional reasons, but out of genuine interest in her dreams and aspirations. They discovered shared appreciation for classical music, philosophical discussions about medical ethics, comfortable silences that did not require conversation to feel complete. Most surprising of all, she realized that she no longer felt trapped by her contract. The luxury, the security, the intellectual challenges of her work had become genuinely appealing rather than simply necessary for survival. And Kim Jae-sung himself had become someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose approval mattered more than professional courtesy required. She was falling in love with the most dangerous man in Seoul. And judging by the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, the feeling might be mutual. The first sign of trouble came in the form of photographs slipped under Zara's apartment door on a Tuesday morning. 3 pictures printed on cheap paper, showing her walking to medical school, studying in the university library, and sitting in her favorite coffee shop near campus. Someone had been following her, documenting her routine, learning her patterns with professional thoroughness. No note accompanied the images, but their message was unmistakably clear. We know where you go. We know when you are alone. We know how to reach you. Zara's hands trembled as she examined each photograph, noting the high quality despite the cheap printing, the careful angles that proved the photographer had taken time to plan each shot. These were not random pictures taken by curious strangers. This was surveillance, methodical and deliberate, conducted by people who understood exactly what they were doing. She called Jae-sung immediately, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Someone has been watching me," she said when he answered on the first ring. "Where are you now?" he asked, his tone shifting immediately from casual to commanding. "My apartment. They left photographs under my door." "Do not leave the building," he instructed. "Do not go to classes today. I will be there in 10 minutes. When he arrived with 2 of his security associates, Zara had spread the photographs across her dining table like evidence in a crime scene. Jae-sung examined each image with the careful attention of someone trained to extract information from minimal clues. "Professional-grade equipment," he noted, pointing to the sharp focus and clear detail despite the distance from which they were taken. "Long-range lens, probably telephoto. These were not taken by amateurs." "Who would want to threaten me?" Zara asked. "I have not done anything to make enemies." "You became my employee," Jae-sung replied grimly. "That alone makes you valuable to anyone who wants leverage against my organization. And after 2 months of treating my associates, you have seen faces and heard names that several people would kill to obtain." The reality hit her like cold water. By accepting his protection and joining his organization, she had automatically become a target for anyone seeking to damage his operations. Her medical skills made her valuable, but her knowledge made her dangerous to his enemies. "What kind of rivals are we talking about?" she asked. "The Yamamoto Syndicate has been testing our territories for months," he replied. "They specialize in kidnapping and torture to extract information from enemy assets. If they have identified you as important to me, they will attempt to capture you for interrogation." The word torture made her stomach clench with nauseating fear. She had signed up to provide medical services, not to become a prisoner of war between criminal organizations. But as Jae-sung arranged for additional security and restricted her movement to the building, she realized that her safety was no longer a matter of personal choice. 3 days later, the threats escalated dramatically. During her pharmacology lecture at the university, Zara began experiencing dizziness and nausea that seemed to come from nowhere. Her vision blurred, her hands started shaking, and a metallic taste filled her mouth. 20 minutes into the lecture, she recognized the symptoms with terrifying clarity. Poison. Someone had contaminated her coffee. She excused herself from class and stumbled to the nearest bathroom, forcing herself to vomit while texting Jae-sung with fingers that barely functioned. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 15 minutes, 3 black cars surrounded the medical school building. Jae-sung himself arrived with a team of associates who swept through the campus like a military operation. They found the coffee vendor who admitted to being paid to add something to her drink, though he claimed not to know what the substance was or who had hired him. The man disappeared that evening, along with any trail leading back to whoever had orchestrated the attempt. In the secure medical facility back at the building, Zara received 4 fluids and activated charcoal to counteract whatever poison had been administered. The symptoms gradually subsided, but the psychological impact lingered. Someone had tried to kill her, or at minimum hospitalize her, simply because she worked for Kim Jae-sung. "This has to stop," she told him as he sat beside her recovery bed. "I cannot live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid of every meal and drink. Maybe I should leave Seoul, go somewhere they cannot find me. Jae-sung's expression hardened into something that belonged on a statue rather than a human face. Leaving would not make you safer, he said firmly. It would make you more vulnerable. Here, you have my protection, my resources, my security team. Alone, you would be completely helpless if they tracked you down. But my presence here puts other people at risk, she protested. Minjun, your other employees, even you. They are targeting me to get to you. They are targeting you because you matter to me, he corrected. Running away would not change that fact. It would simply remove the protection that keeps you alive. His words carried a weight that went beyond professional concern. You matter to me, not as an employee or medical consultant, but as a person whose safety had become personally important to him. The admission hung in the air between them, changing the fundamental nature of their relationship in ways neither had explicitly acknowledged. But the conversation was interrupted by an urgent phone call that drained all color from Jae-sung's face. Minjun had not returned from school, and his security detail was not responding to radio contact. For the next 6 hours, Jae-sung's organization mobilized every available resource to locate the missing child. Phone calls were made to contacts throughout Seoul's underground networks. Security cameras were accessed and analyzed. Pressure was applied to anyone with connections to the Yamamoto syndicate. At 11:30 that evening, they received a video message on Jae-sung's personal phone. Minjun sat in what appeared to be a warehouse, unharmed but clearly frightened, with masked men standing behind him. A voice in accented English delivered a simple message. The woman and the boy. 24 hours. Or we start sending pieces. Zara watched Jae-sung's face transform as he viewed the video, his controlled composure cracking to reveal something savage and absolutely terrifying underneath. This was not the gentle uncle she had seen caring for his nephew, or the sophisticated businessman who had offered her employment. This was a predator whose family had been threatened, and the consequences would be apocalyptic. They want an exchange, he said in a voice like broken glass. You for Minjun? Absolutely not, Zara replied immediately. Give them what they want. I will not let that child suffer because of me. You do not understand, Jae-sung said, his dark eyes blazing with cold fury. If I give you to them, they will torture you for information about my operations, then kill you slowly to punish me for not preventing their capture. And they will probably kill Minjun anyway, because witnesses are liabilities. Then what do we do? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. We eliminate the threat permanently, he replied. All of it. Tonight. What followed was the most terrifying 12 hours of Zara's life. She remained in the secured building while Jae-sung and his associates conducted what he euphemistically called a retrieval operation. No details were provided, but the sound of vehicles departing throughout the night suggested a coordinated assault on multiple locations. At dawn, Jae-sung returned carrying Minjun, both of them rumpled and exhausted but unharmed. The child ran to Zara immediately, clinging to her with desperate relief while she held him close and whispered reassurances in his ear. Whatever he had experienced during his captivity, he seemed more shaken than traumatized, suggesting his uncle had reached him before serious harm could occur. Is it over? Zara asked as they settled Minjun on her couch with hot chocolate and familiar cartoons. The Yamamoto syndicate no longer exists in Seoul, Jae-sung replied matter-of-factly. Their leadership has been permanently relocated. Their operations have been absorbed by more reasonable organizations. The threat to you and Minjun has been eliminated. The casual way he described what was obviously mass violence should have horrified her. 6 months ago, the idea of someone methodically destroying an entire criminal organization would have seemed like the plot of an action movie, far removed from any reality she might encounter. But as she watched Minjun gradually relax into sleep, safe and warm and protected, she found herself grateful rather than appalled. These people had poisoned her, kidnapped a child, threatened to torture and kill them both. Whatever Jae-sung had done to eliminate that threat, it had been necessary to protect innocent people from casual cruelty. That night, as Minjun slept peacefully in her guest room, she found herself alone with Jae-sung in her kitchen. He sat at her small table, still wearing clothes that showed evidence of whatever violence he had orchestrated. There was blood under his fingernails, dirt on his expensive suit, and exhaustion etched into every line of his face. You saved us, she said quietly, pouring him coffee that he probably did not need after such a long night. I protected what belongs to me, he corrected, looking up at her with eyes that held depth she was only beginning to understand. Minjun belongs to you, she agreed. But what about me? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had been willing to address during their months of careful professional interaction. She belonged to him contractually, as an employee under his protection. But the way he had mobilized his entire organization to eliminate threats against her suggested something much deeper than business obligation. You belong to me in every way that matters, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Not because of contracts or employment terms, but because I cannot imagine my world without you in it. She moved around the table to stand beside his chair, close enough to smell the cedar and danger that seemed to be his natural scent, close enough to see the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior. When she reached out to touch his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw with gentle fingers, he leaned into the contact like someone starving for tenderness. I was so afraid, she whispered, not just of dying, but of never seeing you again. Of never being able to tell you that somewhere in the past 2 months, this stopped being about survival and started being about love. His response was immediate and overwhelming. He stood and pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers with desperate intensity. Months of careful distance and professional restraint crumbled as they finally admitted what had been building between them since that first night in his office. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard and holding each other close, Zara realized that everything had changed. She was no longer Kim Jae-sung's protected employee. She was the woman he loved, the person he would destroy entire organizations to keep safe. And despite everything that choice meant about the darkness in his world, she had never felt more secure in her entire life. You are mine, he breathed against her lips, the words both a claim and a promise. And you are mine, she replied, accepting everything that came with loving the most dangerous man in Seoul. The violence, the moral ambiguity, the constant awareness that enemies might target her to reach him. All of it was worth the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the way he held her like she was infinitely precious. Outside her windows, Seoul glittered in the pre-dawn darkness, beautiful and dangerous and full of possibilities she was only beginning to understand. But here in her kitchen, wrapped in the arms of a man who had just dismantled an entire syndicate to protect her, Zara Williams finally felt like she had found her place in the world. It was not the place she had planned, but it was hers. The days following the elimination of the Yamamoto syndicate passed in a strange mixture of heightened security and unexpected peace. Jae-sung's associates maintained constant vigilance around the building, but their presence felt protective rather than oppressive. Seoul's criminal underground had received a clear message about the consequences of threatening Kim Jae-sung's family, and the response was immediate respect rather than escalated conflict. Zara found herself studying Jae-sung with new eyes during this period, noting details she had missed during their months of careful professional interaction. The way he moved through his organization with absolute confidence, commanding loyalty through competence rather than fear. The precision with which he managed complex operations while still finding time to help Minjun with homework. The unexpected gentleness in his hands when he thought no one was watching, whether adjusting his nephew's blankets or touching her shoulder in passing. This was the man she loved. Not just the powerful crime boss who had solved her impossible problems, but the uncle who sang Korean lullabies to chase away nightmares. The employer who ensured her medical education continued without interruption. The protector who would burn down entire organizations to keep his people safe. 3 weeks after the warehouse rescue, Jae-sung returned to her apartment near midnight looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and there was something in his dark eyes that spoke of long hours spent handling unpleasant necessities. "Is it finished?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his posture. "Completely," he replied, settling heavily into her kitchen chair. "Every connection to the Yamamoto operation has been severed. Their allies have been convinced to pursue other interests. Their territories have been redistributed to organizations that understand proper boundaries. There will be no retaliation, no further threats." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of exhaustion she rarely saw from someone so controlled. The cleanup required more time than I anticipated, he continued, ensuring that every loose end was properly handled, every potential future problem eliminated before it could develop. Zara moved behind his chair, resting her hands on his shoulders and feeling the tension that had accumulated over weeks of managing the aftermath of violence. You did what was necessary to protect us, she said quietly. I know that decision was not easy, even when it was obvious. Necessary, he repeated, leaning back into her touch. Yes, but that does not make it simple. Destroying an entire organization, even one that threatened my family, requires choices that most people never have to contemplate. She began massaging his shoulders, working at the knots of stress and responsibility that he carried like armor. Tell me, she said softly. Jae-sung was quiet for several minutes, seeming to weigh how much truth he wanted to share. When he finally spoke, his voice held the careful precision of someone revealing secrets that could not be taken back. The Yamamoto leadership believed they could use you and Minjun as leverage because they saw compassion as weakness, he said. They thought my affection for family made me vulnerable to manipulation. They were half right. My love for you and Minjun does make me vulnerable, but it also makes me infinitely more dangerous than they calculated. He turned in the chair to face her, his dark eyes holding depths of controlled violence and protective devotion that took her breath away. I eliminated them not because they threatened my business operations, he continued. I eliminated them because they put their hands on the two people I love more than my own life. And anyone who makes that mistake will face consequences that exceed their worst nightmares. The raw honesty in his words should have frightened her. 6 months ago, learning that someone had methodically destroyed an entire criminal organization for personal reasons would have sent her running toward the nearest police station. But sitting in her kitchen at midnight, looking into the eyes of the man who would commit any violence necessary to keep her safe, she felt only overwhelming gratitude and love. I know exactly who you are, Kim Jae-sung, she said, framing his face with her hands. I know what you do, what you are capable of, what you have done to protect us. And I love every part of you, including the darkness you think should frighten me away. His control cracked at her words. Months of careful emotional restraint finally giving way to something raw and desperate. He pulled her down into his lap, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. You should be afraid of me, he whispered against her hair. You should want nothing to do with a man who solves problems through violence and intimidation. But I am not afraid, she replied, settling into his embrace with perfect trust. I am grateful. I am protected. I am loved by someone who would move mountains to keep me safe. Why would I fear that kind of devotion? Because loving me means accepting a life that most people would consider morally impossible, he said. It means being protected by methods you cannot discuss, benefiting from activities you cannot defend, living with the knowledge that your security depends on my willingness to be more ruthless than my enemies. Zara pulled back to look directly into his eyes, making sure he could see the certainty in her expression. I chose this life, she reminded him. I signed that contract knowing exactly what kind of man you are and what kind of world you control. And every day since then, I have chosen to stay, not because I am trapped, but because this is where I belong. The words seemed to break something loose inside him, years of emotional barriers crumbling under the weight of unconditional acceptance. When he kissed her, it was with the desperation of someone who had never expected to be loved completely, darkness and all. You are mine, he said when they finally broke apart, his voice rough with emotion. Not just because of contracts or protection arrangements, but because I cannot exist in a world where you belong to anyone else. Mine to protect, mine to love, mine to keep safe from anyone who would harm you. And you are mine, she replied, meaning every word. Mine to trust, mine to love, mine to choose every single day for the rest of our lives. The possession in their words was absolute, the kind of claiming that went deeper than marriage vows or legal documents. This was recognition of fundamental truth, acknowledgement that their lives had become so intertwined that separation would destroy them both. What does that mean for our future? Zara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. It means you finish medical school with my complete support, he replied. It means you continue as my private medical consultant for as long as you find the work fulfilling. It means Minjun grows up with both an uncle and aunt who love him unconditionally. It means we build something permanent together, protected by my resources and strengthened by your compassion." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that made her heart skip several beats. Inside was a ring unlike anything she had ever seen, a flawless diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the kitchen light like captured starfire. "This is not a proposal in the conventional sense," he said, taking the ring from its setting. "We cannot have a traditional wedding, given the nature of my work and the enemies who would view such a public ceremony as an opportunity. But I want you to wear my ring, carry my commitment, know that you are protected by everything I have built." She extended her left hand without hesitation, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger with careful reverence. The fit was perfect, as if it had been designed specifically for her, which she realized it probably had been. "Mrs. Kim," she said, testing the sound of the name. "Zara Kim," he corrected with a smile that transformed his austere features. "My wife in every way that matters, regardless of what legal documents may or may not exist." The word wife carried weight that went beyond romantic commitment. In his world, calling her his wife meant she was under his absolute protection, entitled to every resource at his disposal, defended by the full force of his organization. It was a declaration that would be understood and respected by everyone who dealt with him. "What about Minjun?" she asked, thinking of the child who had brought them together. "He will be our son," Jae-sung replied simply. "Not legally, but actually. He already loves you more than anyone except me, and he needs the stability of a complete family. You are already the closest thing to a mother he has known since my sister died." The thought of raising Minjun together filled her with warmth that had nothing to do with the physical comfort of Jae-sung's embrace. She had always wanted children, though medical school and crushing debt had made that dream seem impossible. Now she would have the chance to help raise a brilliant, loving boy who had already carved out a permanent place in her heart. 6 months later, Zara Kim stood in the kitchen of the penthouse apartment she now shared with her husband and son, reviewing surgical procedures while Minjun practiced English vocabulary at the dining table. Her final medical school exams were approaching, but she felt confident and prepared in ways that would have been impossible during her years of desperate struggle. The transformation in her life was so complete it sometimes felt like remembering someone else's existence. The frightened young woman who had walked through the wrong door at the Meridian Hotel seemed like a character from a story rather than her own past. That woman had worked double shifts for tips that barely covered rent, studied with textbooks held together with tape, counted every dollar while dreams of surgical residency remained hopelessly out of reach. This woman wore a diamond ring worth more than most people earned in a year, lived in luxury that redefined her understanding of comfort, and had unlimited resources to pursue her medical ambitions. More importantly, she was loved and protected by a man who would stop at nothing to ensure her happiness and security. Minjun had grown several inches and gained confidence that made him almost unrecognizable from the terrified child she had first treated. At 9 years old, he was fluent in 3 languages, excelling in mathematics, and displaying the sharp intelligence that ran in his family. He called her Aunt Zara in public and Mom when they were alone, a distinction that felt perfectly natural and infinitely precious. Jae-sung himself had evolved in ways that might surprise anyone who knew only his professional reputation. At home, he was gentle and domestic, helping with homework and reading bedtime stories with the same attention to detail he applied to managing criminal enterprises. He attended her medical school events when security permitted, discussed her career plans with genuine interest, and never missed an opportunity to express pride in her academic achievements. The work itself continued to challenge and satisfy her in unexpected ways. The medical cases that came through his organization were complex and varied, requiring skills that traditional hospital practice might never have developed. She had become expert at treating trauma in non-standard environments, managing pain without leaving medical records, and providing care that left no traces for authorities to follow. More importantly, she had learned to see the humanity in people that society labeled criminals. The associates she treated were complex individuals with families and dreams and problems that extended beyond their professional activities. Many were supporting children, caring for elderly parents, or working to build legitimate businesses with money earned through less conventional means. Her moral certainty about right and wrong had evolved into something more nuanced, more realistic about the complexities of survival in a world where legal and ethical did not always overlap. She still believed in helping people and saving lives, but she had expanded her definition of who deserved care and protection. That evening, as they shared dinner in their dining room with views of Seoul's glittering skyline, Minjun announced that his teacher had selected him to represent his class in a mathematics competition. The pride in Jae-sung's eyes was unmistakable as he listened to his nephew describe the problems he would need to solve and the recognition he might earn. "We should celebrate," Zara suggested. "What would you like to do this weekend, Minjun?" "Can we go to the park?" he asked. "All three of us together, like a real family." The request was simple but loaded with meaning. In the early months after his mother's death, Minjun had been suspicious of any woman who showed interest in his uncle, protective of their small family unit and fearful of being replaced or abandoned. But over time, as Zara's presence became constant and caring, he had begun to hope for the stability of a complete family. "We are a real family," Jae-sung assured him, reaching across the table to ruffle his hair. "Aunt Zara is not going anywhere, and neither am I. We are all staying together forever." "Promise?" Minjun asked, looking between them with the serious expression of someone who had already lost one parent and needed absolute certainty about his remaining security. "I promise," Zara said, covering his small hand with hers. "Nothing will separate us. You are stuck with me for life." That night, after Minjun had fallen asleep and they had completed the security checks that were part of their evening routine, Zara found herself standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bedroom, looking out at the city that had become her home. Jae-sung joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pulling her back against his chest. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, a question he had begun asking periodically as if he needed reassurance that she had not begun to reconsider her choices. "About falling in love with you," she replied. "About building a family with you. About having a life where I never worry about money or safety or whether my dreams are achievable. Not a single regret." She leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of his presence and the absolute security of his protection. Even now, she knew there were armed guards stationed throughout the building, security systems monitoring every entrance, and protocols in place to handle any conceivable threat to their safety. But those precautions felt like necessary luxuries rather than oppressive restrictions. They were the price of loving a powerful man, the cost of building a life in a world where enemies existed and resources were required to neutralize them. And that price felt infinitely worth paying for the love and security she had gained in return. "Do you remember that first night?" she asked. "When I walked through the wrong door and found you in that conference room." "Best accident that ever happened," he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Though I suspect it was not entirely accidental. I think you were supposed to find your way to me, supposed to become part of my world." She turned in his arms to face him, noting the contentment that had replaced the cold control he had worn like armor when they first met. Marriage and family had softened his edges without diminishing his strength, given him reason to build rather than simply defend. "I love you, Kim Jae-sung," she said, words that still felt miraculous after months of daily repetition. "I love you, Zara Kim," he replied. "My wife, my partner, my reason for everything I do." As they held each other in the quiet luxury of their shared bedroom, with their son sleeping safely down the hall and their future stretching ahead, filled with possibilities, Zara marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had walked into the wrong room one desperate night and found the right life waiting for her on the other side. From struggling medical student to protected wife of the most powerful man in Seoul. From counting every dollar to unlimited resources for pursuing her dreams. From isolation and exhaustion to family and security. The transformation was so complete it sometimes felt like magic rather than reality. But it was real. The ring on her finger, the child in their care, the man whose heartbeat she could feel against her chest. All real, all hers, all protected by love fierce enough to eliminate anyone who threatened their happiness. She had found her place in the world, and it was here,